Hello students, we are going to start with the new chapter of our class 10th Science NCERT textbook, that is chapter number 8, How do organisms reproduce? So in today's class we are just going to go through a brief introduction about the chapter. So before we discuss the mechanisms by which organisms reproduce, let us ask a more basic question. Why do organisms reproduce? Now, before we start studying about how do organisms reproduce, first let's understand that why do organisms reproduce? After all, reproduction is not necessary to maintain the life of an individual organism. Unlike the essential life processes like nutrition, respiration, or excretion. And on the other hand, if an individual organism is going to create more individual, a lot of its energy will be spent in the process. If one individual organism is going to create more individuals, then lots of energy will be released from him during this process. So why should an individual organism waste on energy on a process it does not need to stay alive? Why should he waste his energy on this all things? It would be interesting to discuss the possible answers in the classroom. Whatever the answer to this question, it is obvious that we notice organisms because they reproduce, right? If they were to be only one non-reproducing member of a particular kind, it is doubtful that we would have noticed its existence. If the organisms would not reproduce, then we will be able to notice its existence. It is the large number of organisms belonging to a single species that bring them to our notice. Now, how do we know that two different individual organisms belongs to the same species? Usually we say this because they look similar to each other. If two organisms look similar to each other, then we can easily identify that these two different individual organisms, they belong to the same species. Thus, reproducing organisms create new individuals that look very much like themselves. If the organisms reproduce, they will create new individuals and that will look very much like themselves. So, the topics that we are going to cover in this chapter are introduction, types of reproduction, sexual reproduction in flowering plants, sexual reproduction in humans, male and female reproductive system, population control, sexually transmitted diseases, and asexual methods of reproduction. So, let's start first with the introduction. Reproduction is defined as the process of giving birth to young ones. So, it is the process of giving birth to young ones. Now, before going further to next topic, that is types of reproduction, first let's understand that do organisms create exact copies of themselves? Do they create the exact similar copies of themselves? Let's see. Organisms look similar because their body designs are similar. So if body designs are to be similar, the blueprints for this design should be similar, right? So thus, organism at its most basic level will involve making copies of the blueprints of body design. Now in your class 9th, you might have learned that the chromosomes in the nucleus of a cell, the chromosomes that are present in the nucleus of a cell contain information for inheritance of features from parents to next generation in the form of DNA, right? So we say that it depends on the DNA, that whether he is the father of the child or she is the mother of the child, right? DNA reports, DNA test can prove that. So how can we do it? It is through the Chromosomes that are present in the nucleus, they contain information for inheritance. Means the features that a parent possess will be present inside the child. That is known as inheritance. So we can say that it is the child inherits the features of his parents from parents to the next generation in the form of DNA. Through DNA we can test it that whether the child inherits the features of the parents. So through that we can identify, through that we can recognize that whether these are the parents of the child or not. The full form of DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. D is for deoxyribo, N is for nucleic, and A is for acid. The DNA in the cell nucleus is the information source for making proteins. So the DNA that is present in the nucleus of the cell, it is the information source. It gives us information, it gives the information to the cell for the formation of proteins, and if the information is changed, different proteins will be made. What type of proteins, that you will study in your higher classes. Here, just for the sake of information, the function of DNA, it is for the formation of proteins, and if this information is changed, then different types of proteins will be made. Different proteins will eventually lead to altered body design. If the proteins will change, if different types of proteins will be formed, then the body design will also be different. So therefore, a basic event in reproduction is the creation of a DNA copy. So during reproduction, there should be a creation of a DNA copy. Cells use chemical reaction to build copies of their DNA. To form the copies of DNA, cells use the chemical reactions. This creates two copies of the DNA in a reproducing cell. So with this chemical reaction, two copies of the DNA are formed in a reproducing cell, and they will need to be separated from each other. Then afterwards they need to be separated from each other. However, keeping one copy of DNA in the original cell and simply pushing the other one out would not work. So, because the copy pushed out would not have any organized cellular structure for maintaining life processes. So therefore, DNA copying is accompanied by the creation of an additional cellular apparatus, and then DNA copies separate, each with its own cellular apparatus. Effectively, a cell divides to give rise to two cells. So what happens that here, as I told you, that after some time the two copies of the DNA will be separated from each other, but it is not separated like we will keep the original copy of DNA we will keep in the one copy of DNA we will keep in the original cell, and the other copy we will push it out. That will not work. What we have to do is the two copies of DNA. The other copy which is pushed out will not have any cellular structure through which it can maintain the life processes. So that's why DNA copying is accompanied. When the DNA copying process is going on, that time there is creation of an additional cellular apparatus. Another cellular apparatus is created, and then the DNA copies are separated, so that one cell apparatus which is useful for maintaining the life processes is with one copy of DNA, and the other cellular apparatus which is formed, the additional cellular apparatus, will go with the other copy. So this way the two copies will be separated, and afterwards when this two copies are separated having their own cellular apparatus, each one of them having their own cellular apparatus, the cell divides to give rise to two cells. The cell will divide and it will give rise to two cells. This way it is done. And these two cells are of course similar, but are they likely to be absolutely identical? Now we know that these two cells are similar, but are they identical? The answer to this question will depend on how accurately the copying reactions involved occur. So, are they identical, absolutely identical or not? That we can see by that depends on how accurately the copying reaction, the chemical reaction for DNA copying is how accurately it is involved, how accurately it occurs, and no biochemical reaction is absolutely reliable. The biochemical reaction that are responsible for DNA copying, they are not absolutely reliable. So therefore it is only to be expected that the process of copying the DNA will have some variations each time. So every time when there is DNA copying, so we have to see, we have to expect that the process of copying of DNA, the process of DNA copying will have some variations each time, some difference each time. So as a result, the DNA copies generated will be similar. The DNA copies that will be generated, that will be similar, but may not be identical to the original. It will be not exactly the same copy as the original one, and some of these variations might be so drastic that the new DNA copy cannot work with the cellular apparatus it inherits. So there will be some variations, that some of the variations are so drastic, so huge, that the DNA copy that is formed, it will not work with the cellular apparatus it inherits. That means the cellular apparatus which it gets from the original one, from the previous one, it may not inherit. Such a huge difference could be also there, and such a newborn cell will simply die because it will not have the cellular apparatus, and so that's why the cell will simply die. And on the other hand, there could still be many other variations in the DNA copies that would not lead to such a drastic outcome. So there could still be many other variations in the DNA copies that would not lead to such a huge variation. Only small variations could be also there, minor variation. Thus the surviving cells are similar to but subtly different from each other. The cells that are surviving, they might be similar but they are different from each other. This inbuilt tendency for variation during reproduction is the basis of evolution. So this is this tendency which is there, which is inbuilt for variation, the tendency for variation which is already present during reproduction is the basis of evolution. The evolution we will discuss about evolution in the next chapter in detail. So this was about that, do organisms create exact copies of themselves? No, they do not create. They are similar but they are not absolutely identical. So there is the importance of variation also. If there will be variation, there is some importance of that also. What is that? Population of organisms fill well-defined places or niches in the ecosystem using their ability to reproduce. And the consistency of DNA copying during reproduction is important. The consistency, that means consistently, continuously the DNA copying during reproduction is important. Why? For the maintenance of body design features. Then only the body design features will be maintained, and that will allow the organism to use that particular niche. So reproduction is therefore linked to the stability of population of species. So this way it is useful. And however, niches can change. Nikes are the places. It can change because of reasons beyond the control of the organism. If the reasons go beyond the control of the organism, then the niche will change. Temperatures on earth can go up or down. Water level also vary, or there could be meteorite hits also. And to think of a few examples like this, and if a population of reproducing organism were suited to a particular niche, then if the niche were drastically altered, the population could be wiped out. So if the niche goes a drastic alteration, means if there is a huge change in the niche, then the population will be wiped out, will be completely destroyed. So however, if some variations were to be present in a few individual in these populations, if there is some variation, some differences there in the population, there would be some chance for them to survive. There will be chances of them to survive. And if there were a population of bacteria living in temperate waters, if there is a population of bacteria that are living in the temperate waters, and if the water temperature were to be increased by global warming, if the temperature of water increases by global warming, then most of these bacteria would die. And that's why but the few variants resistant to heat, there are some few variants, there are some few bacteria having variations in them. Maybe they are having variations that they are resistant to heat. They would survive and they would grow further. So that's why variation is useful for the survival of species over time. Variation is useful. So that was the introduction of the chapter. Now we will study about the types of reproduction. Basically there are two types of reproduction: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction, right? So let's see the basic difference of sexual and asexual reproduction. This you are learning from your lower classes. So sexual reproduction is biparental. Biparental means two parents are involved. So two parents are involved, that means male and female, both parents are involved. And asexual reproduction, it is uniparental, only one parent is involved. Then in sexual reproduction, fertilization takes place. Fertilization means it is the fusion of male and female gamete to produce zygote. Zygote is the first cell. Male gamete is the sperm and the female gamete is the egg or ovum. It fuses to form the first cell, that is zygote. And here in asexual reproduction, no fertilization takes place. Then, sexual reproduction, young ones inherit some character of parents and some new ones. The offspring that is produced, the child that is produced, that is delivered, it inherits, it consists of some characters of the parent. It has some character of the parent and some it has new character. While in asexual reproduction, young ones are clones of parent, means the young ones are exactly similar, exactly the copies of parent. Then sexual reproduction leads to evolution. There is evolution, means new characteristics are observed in the offspring. Here the child, the baby that is developed, the fetus, we term it as offspring. Okay, and asexual reproduction do not lead to evolution. It has the young ones that are produced has the same characters, same they are totally identical to the parent one. Then example of sexual reproduction is in humans, and asexual reproduction you can take amoeba. Other examples also you can take hydra. Then for sexual reproduction, humans, animals, we can take like this way, right? So this was the basic difference of sexual and asexual reproduction. Now we will go in detail for both the reproduction. First we will start with sexual reproduction. So before going to sexual reproduction in humans, we will go with the sexual reproduction in plants. So first, we are familiar with the modes of reproduction that depend on the involvement of two individuals, right? Two individuals are involved in sexual reproduction before a new generation is created. So now here, the creation of two new cells from one involves copying of DNA as well as of the cellular apparatus. Here, the two new cells are created by the involvement of DNA copying as well as cellular apparatus are also created in both the cells. So, the DNA copying mechanism, as we have noted, cannot be absolutely accurate. It is not accurate. There are some errors which leads to variation in the population of organism. Now, every individual organism cannot be protected by variation, but in a population, variations are useful, that we just now studied in the introduction part. Now, therefore, it makes sense that if organisms came up with reproductive modes that allowed more and more variation to be generated. So, if we see sexual reproduction in flowering plants, means the reproductive parts of angiosperms. You will be knowing that these are called as angiosperms, right? So they are located in the flower. The reproductive parts are located in the flower itself. For this understanding of the sexual reproduction, you need to keep your textbook by your side so that you can see the figure that is given on page number 134 of your textbook, figure 8.7. It is the longitudinal section of a flower is given. It is already given here in the slide itself, but there you can see it clearly. So here if you see, you have already studied the different parts of a flower, right? Sepals, petals, stamens and pistil. So stamens and pistil are the reproductive part of a flower which contains the germ cells. These stamens and pistil, stamen and pistil, these are the two reproductive parts of a flower and these contain germ cells. Now, what possible functions could the petals and sepals have? Then what are the functions of sepals and petals? Now you know, the flower may be unisexual. Example, papaya is there, watermelon is there. When it contains either stamens or pistils, these contain, some flowers are there which are unisexual. So they contain either stamen or pistil. Or we can say there are some which are bisexual, which contain both stamen and pistil. Example, if we take hibiscus and mustard plant. So stamen is the male reproductive part. So this stamen which contains anther and filament, about this we will study in detail just now. It is the male reproductive part. And the function of stamen is to produce pollen grains that are yellowish in color. Here you can see this yellowish in color are there. These are the pollen grains. So they are produced by the stamen. And you must have seen this yellowish powder that often sticks to our hand. When you touch a shoe flower which is red in color, hibiscus plant, when you touch its yellow part, some yellowish powder like is there, it sticks to our hand. So that if we touch the stamen of a flower, so if we touch the stamen of a flower, this yellowish powder sticks to our hand. And pistil is present in the center of a flower. If you see, this is the pistil. It is present in the center of the flower and it is made and is the female reproductive part of the plant. It is made of three parts. Pistil is made up of three parts. The swollen bottom part is the ovary. This swollen bottom part is the ovary. Middle elongated part is the style. This, just now I'll make it clear. This middle elongated part is the style. This is the ovary. And the terminal part which may be sticky is the stigma. The terminal part which is present at the terminal end, it is sticky, is the stigma. The ovary contains ovules. You can see the small dots. It contains, these are the ovules, and each ovule has an egg cell. Each ovule consists of an egg cell. Then the male germ cell, which is produced by the pollen grains. The male germ cell which are produced by the pollen grains. We know that stamen produces pollen grains. So these pollen grains produces the male germ cells, and these male germ cells fuses with the female gamete present in the ovule. So this ovary consists of ovule and the ovule consists of female gamete. So the male germ cell fuses with the female gamete, and this fusion of the germ cell or fertilization gives us the zygote. When this male germ cell fuses with the female gamete, it produces the zygote, which is capable of growing into a new plant. It is capable of growing into a new plant. So this is the reproduction in plants. See, again I am repeating. If you see here, these are the female reproductive parts. You can see here clearly. This is the ovary. This ovary contains ovule. This is the ovule, right? Then this elongated part is the style, and this is the stigma. Then comes the male part. Male part is the stamen. This stamen consists of a elongated tube, that is filament, and anther is there, which is the yellowish part. This anther produces the pollen grains. Stamen is responsible for the production of pollen grains, and these pollen grains are produced by anther. Then these pollen grains produces male germ cells, and these male germ cells fuses with the female gamete. In the ovule, female gamete is present, and these male germ cells which are produced by the germ cells which are produced by the pollen grains fuses with the female gamete, and it produces the zygote, and this zygote is capable of growing into a new plant. So thus the pollen needs to be transferred from the stamen to the stigma. So that's why from stamen to the stigma the pollen needs to be transferred. And if this transfer of pollen occurs in the same flower, if it occurs in the same flower, suppose this is a flower, and if from here only the pollens are transferred to the stigma, means in the same flower, then it is referred to as self-pollination. Means in it same flower, in the self flower only, that we term as self-pollination. And on the other hand, if the pollen is transferred from one flower to another, if the pollen is transferred from one, this is the pollen of first flower, and there is the another flower here. So if the pollen is transferred from one flower to another flower, that is termed as cross pollination. And this transfer of pollen from one flower to another is achieved by agents like wind, water, or animals. How do this pollen gets transferred? Because from one flower to another, how will it get transferred? They can't move and transfer it. So it is transferred by the help of wind, water, or animals. Through that it undergoes cross pollination. I hope you are clear with self pollination and cross pollination. So, after the pollen lands on a suitable stigma, it has to reach the female germ cells which are in the ovary. So, when the pollen lands on the stigma, now the pollen lands on the stigma, right? Now it has to reach the female germ cell. It is present in the ovary. It will land to the female germ cell. Then what happens is, for this a tube grows out of the pollen grain and travels through the style to reach the ovary. So a tube grows out in the cell here. If you can see, this is the stigma, and from here a tube grows out from the pollen grains, and through the style, this is the style, it reaches the ovary, right? So then what happens, now after fertilization, the zygote divides several times. The zygote will divide several times to form an embryo within the ovule. So within the ovule, the zygote divides several times, undergoes division, and there the embryo is formed within the ovule. So this you can see, this is the structure, this is the ovule, and this is the enlarged structure of ovule. See, this type of embryo sac is formed inside the ovule. Then what happens, the ovule develops a tough coat and is gradually converted into a seed. So this way it converts into a seed, and a tough coat is developed over the ovule, and the ovary grows rapidly and ripens to form a fruit. Then the ovary grows rapidly and it forms a fruit. So meanwhile, the petals, sepals, stamens, style and stigma may shrivel and fall off. When the ovary is growing, that time the petals, stamens, sepals, style and stigma, they shrivel and they fall off. They fall off, they destroy. Now, have you observed any flower part still persisting in the fruit? Try and work out the advantages of seed formation for the plant. Now, the seed contains the future plant or embryo which develops into a seedling under appropriate condition. Now, that seed which is formed, it contains the future plant, and that it contains the future plant, or we can say it contains the embryo, and this embryo develops into a seedling under appropriate condition. Under appropriate condition means under appropriate temperature and pressure, and this process is known as germination. The seeds germinate, that is germination process. So this is germination process. If you want to see it, this is the how the embryo sac looks. This is the embryo sac of an angiosperm. Here there are two synergids. This is the egg cell. Two synergids are there beside it. Then two polar nuclei will be there, and this is the central cell. And here three antipodal cells are there which are similar in size and shape. Here you can see in the bottom three antipodal cells are there. Here two synergids and one egg cell. And in between two polar nuclei is there, and this is the central cell. This is the embryo sac of an angiosperm. So that's all for today's class. I hope you are clear what is taught. Thank you and have a